Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest. The late summer evening draped my quaint countryside home in a soft amber glow, the sun dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the rolling fields that stretched beyond my porch. I stood in the dining room, adjusting the final touches on the table, my fingers trembling slightly with a nervous excitement I couldn't quite place. At 38, I, Clara Bennett, had always prided myself on creating moments of warmth for my family, and tonight was no exception. My husband, Nathan, had invited his best friend, Ryan, over for dinner, a tradition we'd kept alive since their university days. I'd spent the afternoon perfecting every detail. The table was adorned with a crisp cream tablecloth, a vase of wildflowers glowing in the flickering light of beeswax candles, and the rich aroma of garlic roasted lamb and thyme wafted from the kitchen, wrapping the house in a comforting embrace. I smoothed the skirt of my emerald green dress, the fabric cool against my skin, and took a deep breath, trying to steady the strange flutter in my chest. Something about tonight felt different, heavier, though I couldn't pinpoint why. I heard the low rumble of Nathan's laughter from the living room, followed by Ryan's familiar, easy chuckle, and the sound brought a smile to my lips. Ryan had been a constant in our lives for over a decade. Birthdays, holidays, lazy summer barbecues. He was the kind of man who could light up a room with his effortless charm. At 40, he was ruggedly handsome, with tousled chestnut hair, warm brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and a quiet strength that made people feel at ease. But as I caught a glimpse of him through the doorway, I noticed something new in his demeanor, a subtle tension in his shoulders, a flicker of hesitation in his gaze that I'd never seen before. I brushed the thought aside, chalking it up to my imagination, and called out, "Dinner's ready, you two!" They ambled into the dining room, Nathan's arm slung casually around Ryan's shoulder, their camaraderie a comforting sight. Nathan, at 39, was the steady anchor of my life, tall, with sandy blonde hair and a boyish grin that still made my heart skip after 15 years of marriage. "Clara, you've outdone yourself," he said, his voice warm as he pulled out a chair for me, his hand brushing my back in a familiar, grounding gesture. I smiled, but my eyes darted to Ryan, who was watching me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. He quickly looked away, clearing his throat as he took his seat across from me. The conversation flowed effortlessly at first, the way it always did with the three of us. Nathan poured the wine, a deep ruby red Merlot that shimmered in the candlelight, and we raised our glasses in a toast. "To friendship," Nathan said, his grin wide. "To the best nights and the best fights," Ryan added, his voice light but with an edge I couldn't quite place. I laughed, the sound a little too bright, and clinked my glass against theirs, the crystal chiming softly in the warm air. We reminisced about their university days, tales of late-night study sessions, pranks gone wrong, and the time Ryan accidentally set off the fire alarm in their dorm. I'd heard the stories 100 times, but they still made me laugh, the familiarity a balm to the strange unease that lingered in my chest. But as the evening wore on, between the second glass of wine and the first bite of the lemon tart I'd baked for dessert, I noticed Ryan's demeanor shift. His fingers traced the rim of his glass in slow, deliberate circles, his eyes flickering between me and Nathan as if he were wrestling with something heavy. The laughter faded, replaced by a charged silence that made the air feel thick, oppressive. My stomach knotted, a cold dread creeping up my spine as I watched him. "I need to tell you both something," Ryan said suddenly, his voice low, almost a whisper, but it cut through the stillness like a blade. I froze, my fork hovering over my plate, the tart's tangy sweetness forgotten. Nathan, oblivious to the shift, leaned back in his chair, raising a curious eyebrow. "Come on, Ryan, don't get all serious on us now," he teased, a playful smirk tugging at his lips. But Ryan wasn't smiling. His fingers tapped against the table, a nervous rhythm, and then he exhaled sharply, his gaze locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "This is about you, Clara," he said, his voice trembling slightly, each word heavy with meaning. My stomach plummeted, a cold sweat prickling at the back of my neck. "Me?" I repeated, my voice barely audible, my fingers tightening around the stem of my wine glass as I tried to keep my composure. Nathan's smirk faded, his brow furrowing as he glanced between us. Ryan nodded, his eyes darting to Nathan for a fleeting moment before returning to me, raw and unguarded. I should have said this years ago, but I never found the right moment. And now, I don't think I can keep quiet anymore. Nathan let out a short, disbelieving laugh, shaking his head. Ryan, what the hell are you talking about? He asked, his tone light but laced with an edge of unease. Ryan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, and leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent a chill through me. I've been in love with Clara for years. The words hit me like a tidal wave, stealing the air from my lungs. The room seemed to tilt, the soft glow of the candles blurring as my heartbeat thundered in my ears. Nathan froze, his glass halfway to his lips, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. I felt my hands tremble, the wine glass slipping from my fingers and landing on the table with a soft clink, a few drops spilling onto the cream tablecloth like bloodstains. The ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner suddenly felt deafening, each second stretching into an eternity as Ryan's confession hung in the air, an undeniable truth that shattered the warmth of the evening. Nathan was the first to react, his laugh sharp and hollow, devoid of humor. All right, Ryan, you've had too much wine, he said, shaking his head as if he could dismiss the words with a wave of his hand. Let's not— I'm serious, Ryan interrupted, his voice firm, cutting through Nathan's denial like a knife. I'm not saying this to cause trouble. I've buried it for years, for the sake of our friendship, for the sake of your marriage, but I can't pretend anymore. His eyes were locked on mine, raw and vulnerable, and I felt a dizzying mix of emotions crash over me. Shock, confusion, and a strange, unplaceable ache deep in my chest. My mind raced, replaying a decade of memories in a frantic blur. Ryan had always been there, bringing me flowers for my birthday, helping Nathan fix the porch swing last summer, his warm laughter filling our home during countless gatherings. He'd always been kind, thoughtful, but I'd never once suspected this. How could I have missed it? How could he have hidden something so monumental for so long? My hands shook as I set my glass down, my voice trembling as I forced myself to speak. Ryan, I don't know what to say, I stammered, my throat tight, my words barely audible over the pounding of my heart. Nathan's jaw clenched, his chair scraping against the wooden floor as he stood abruptly, the sound jarring in the tense silence. This is insane, he muttered, his voice low and dangerous, his hands balling into fists at his sides. Why are you telling us this now? His eyes burned with a mix of anger and betrayal, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths as he glared at Ryan. Ryan met his gaze, unflinching, though his voice trembled with emotion. Because I thought I could live with it, but I can't, he said, his words raw, stripped of pretense. He turned to me, his expression a mix of longing and regret that made my stomach twist. Clara, I don't expect anything from you. I know you love Nathan. I would never try to come between you two, but I needed to tell you the truth, at least once in my life. I felt Nathan's eyes on me, sharp and searching, waiting for my reaction, but I was paralyzed, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, to pretend it never happened, to cling to the normalcy we'd had just moments ago. But another part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, felt a flicker of something I couldn't name, a deep, unspoken tension that made my chest ache. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to find my voice, though it trembled with every word. Ryan, I had no idea, I said, my voice breaking as I looked at him, then at Nathan, my heart pounding against my ribs. I don't know what to say. Ryan nodded as if he'd expected my response, his shoulders slumping as he exhaled slowly. I'm sorry, he said softly, his voice thick with regret. I just couldn't keep it in anymore. He looked down at his hands, his fingers twisting together, the weight of his confession settling over him like a storm cloud. Nathan's fists clenched tighter, his breathing ragged as he took a step toward Ryan. You had no right, he growled, his voice low and trembling with barely contained fury. No right to come here and drop this on us. His words were sharp, each one laced with the sting of betrayal, and I felt my chest tighten, a wave of guilt washing over me even though I'd done nothing wrong. "I'm not trying to take her from you, Nathan," Ryan said, his voice steady but pleading, his eyes searching Nathan's for understanding. "I just wanted her to know." His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, and I felt the room close in around me, the walls pressing against my chest as the tension threatened to choke me. The silence that followed was unbearable, a void that swallowed every sound except the relentless ticking of the clock. My hands were clammy, my pulse racing as I looked at the table, the uneaten tart, the half-empty glasses of wine, the wildflowers wilting slightly in the heat of the candles. Everything had seemed so perfect just moments ago, so normal. Now, it felt like the ground had shifted beneath me, leaving me teetering on the edge of a chasm I hadn't seen coming. Nathan's voice broke through the stillness, sharp and cold, a tone I'd never heard from him before. "I think you should go, Ryan." Ryan's face crumpled, a mix of regret and guilt flashing across his features as he opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, the words dying on his lips. He stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor, the sound echoing in the heavy silence. I remained frozen, my hands gripping the edge of the table, my mind a chaotic storm of thoughts I couldn't untangle. Ryan had always been a steady presence in our lives. How could he have kept this from me? Why now, after all these years? "I'm sorry, Clara," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion as he met my gaze one last time. His brown eyes filled with a vulnerability that made my heart ache. "I never wanted to hurt you." Before I could respond, he turned and walked to the door, his steps heavy, as if each one carried the weight of his confession. The door closed softly behind him, the sound a quiet finality that left the room feeling eerily empty. I turned to Nathan, my heart heavy with confusion, my voice trembling as I spoke. "Nathan," I said softly, but he didn't look at me, his gaze fixed on the floor, his hands running through his hair in frustration. "Nathan, please," I repeated more urgently this time, my voice breaking as I crossed the room to him, my hands reaching for his arm. He turned to face me then, his expression a storm of conflicting emotions: anger, hurt, betrayal. "You don't get it, Clara," he said, his voice low and strained, his blue eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my chest ache. "This isn't just about Ryan. This is about trust, about everything we've built." His words hit me like a punch, the accusation in his tone stinging more than I could bear. I shook my head, my throat tight with unshed tears, my hands trembling as I gripped his arm. "I never asked him for this, Nathan," I said, my voice rising with desperation. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." My words felt hollow, inadequate, as if they couldn't bridge the chasm that had opened between us. "I don't care if you didn't know," he snapped, his voice rising, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "The fact is, he's been holding on to this for years, and now he's dropped it on us like a damn grenade, and you're telling me it doesn't matter." His anger was a living thing, crackling in the air between us, and I felt a sharp pang of betrayal. Not from Ryan, but from Nathan, for doubting me after all we'd been through. "I didn't say it didn't matter," I said, my voice steadying despite the tears burning in my eyes, my hands falling to my sides as I took a step back. "I said it's not about us. It's about him, his feelings. I can't change what he feels, but that doesn't mean I feel the same way." My words were a plea, a desperate attempt to make him see that I hadn't betrayed him, that my heart still belonged to him. Nathan's face softened, but only slightly, his shoulders slumping as he ran a hand over his face, his anger giving way to a deeper hurt. "You're not seeing it, Clara," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less heavy. "This changes everything. How can I trust him again? How can I trust you?" The question hung in the air, a dagger to my heart, and I felt the sting of tears spill down my cheeks, hot and unrelenting. The words cut deeper than I cared to admit, a sharp reminder of the fragility of trust, even in a marriage as strong as ours. I had been loyal to Nathan for 15 years, through every challenge, every storm, and yet now it felt like everything was being questioned. Ryan walked toward the door, his steps slow and heavy, as if each one weighed him down. I wanted to stop him, to demand answers, to understand why he'd chosen this moment to unravel our lives, but the words wouldn't come. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Nathan and me alone in the suffocating silence. "You didn't tell me, Clara," Nathan said after a long moment, his voice soft but laced with hurt. His eyes distant as he stared out the window, the soft glow of the streetlights casting shadows across his face. "You didn't tell me how you felt about him." My heart sank, a cold dread settling in my chest as I shook my head, my voice trembling with emotion. "I didn't feel anything, Nathan. Not like that," I said, my words fragile, uncertain, as if I were trying to convince both him and myself. But the truth was, I didn't know what I felt. Not anymore. Ryan's confession had stirred something in me, a flicker of doubt I hadn't known existed, and it terrified me. Nathan studied me carefully, his expression unreadable, before letting out a deep sigh, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Maybe I just need some time to process all of this," he murmured, running a hand over his face, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I don't know what to think right now." "I understand," I whispered, my voice barely audible, my hands twisting together in a nervous knot as I fought to hold back the tears. "I need time too." The words felt like a lifeline, a way to hold on to the fragile hope that we could find our way back to each other, even after this. He nodded, his eyes distant, before turning away and walking to the window, the soft glow of the streetlights illuminating the lines of tension in his face. I felt a chasm opening between us, a rift I didn't know how to bridge, as if something inside him had shifted, and perhaps something inside me too. For the rest of the night, we barely spoke, Nathan retreating into the silence of his thoughts while I sat at the table, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and emotions. The dinner that had begun with laughter and warmth now felt like a distant memory, the connection we'd shared replaced by a heavy, unspoken tension that left me breathless. The days that followed were a haze of quiet unease, the air in our home thick with the weight of Ryan's confession. Nathan and I moved around each other like ghosts, our conversations stilted, our words careful, as if we were walking on a tightrope, afraid to fall. I kept replaying that night over and over in my head, the look on Ryan's face, the raw vulnerability in his eyes, the way Nathan's anger had morphed into hurt. I couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at me, even though I hadn't encouraged Ryan, hadn't known about his feelings. Why hadn't I seen the signs? How could someone hide such a deep, consuming love for so long? And why did it feel like a betrayal of Nathan, even though I'd done nothing wrong? One evening, a week after the dinner, I sat alone in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows on the walls, the house eerily quiet without the usual sounds of laughter and conversation. Nathan was at work, and I'd spent the day trying to make sense of the mess we were in, my thoughts a tangled knot I couldn't unravel. The doorbell rang, startling me out of my reverie, and I stood, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't name. I opened the door to find Ryan standing there, his face etched with uncertainty, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. "Ryan," I breathed, my voice a mix of surprise and apprehension, my hands gripping the doorframe as I braced myself. "What are you doing here?" He shifted uncomfortably, his brown eyes searching mine with a quiet intensity that made my chest tighten. "I needed to talk to you," he said softly, his voice low and hesitant, his hands fidgeting in his pockets. "I know I shouldn't have come, but I couldn't just leave things the way they are." I hesitated, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, but I stepped aside, allowing him in, my voice trembling as I spoke. "You shouldn't have come here, Ryan," I said, my words sharp with the weight of my emotions. "Nathan—" I know," he interrupted, his voice quiet, almost apologetic, as he stepped into the living room, his eyes scanning the space as if unsure of where to stand. I couldn't leave without seeing you one last time. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I realize I've made a huge mess of things. But I need to apologize, Clara. I owe you that much." I stood there, my arms crossed over my chest, my heart pounding as I tried to process his words. The tension between us was palpable, a heavy weight that pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. "Ryan, why did you tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and confusion, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. "Why did you have to say it that night?" He exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of his regret was too much to bear. "Because I couldn't keep it inside anymore," he said, his voice raw with emotion, his hands running through his hair in frustration. "I thought it was something I could bury, but the truth is, I've been carrying it for so long, and when I saw you that night, I couldn't pretend it didn't matter." He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with regret, a vulnerability that made my heart ache despite my anger. "I was selfish, Clara. I should have never said anything. I didn't want to cause pain, but I guess that's exactly what I've done." His words hit me harder than I expected, the sincerity in his voice cutting through the fog of my emotions. There was so much rawness in his confession, so much pain, and I realized that he'd been wrestling with this for years, a burden he'd carried alone. I took a deep breath, my voice softening as I spoke, though it still trembled with emotion. "You didn't have to carry that weight on your own, Ryan," I said, my hands unclenching as I took a step toward him. "But you're right. You should have kept it to yourself. You've put Nathan and me in a very difficult position." "I know," he whispered, his voice breaking, his eyes glistening with unshed tears as he met my gaze. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to destroy anything." The pain in his voice was palpable, a mirror of the hurt I'd seen in Nathan's eyes, and I felt a strange mix of anger and compassion wash over me. "Nathan's hurt," I said softly, my voice shaking as I fought to keep my emotions in check, my hands twisting together in a nervous knot. "And I'm hurt too. But we need time, Ryan. I can't fix this for either of us. We both need space to figure out how to move forward." My words were firm, a boundary I needed to set, not just for Nathan, but for myself. Ryan nodded, the weight of my words settling between us, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, his hands falling to his sides. "I didn't come here to fix things. I came to apologize, and to give you the space you need." He took a step back, his eyes searching mine one last time, a quiet plea in his gaze. "I just wanted to make sure you knew how sorry I am." I watched him leave, the door clicking shut behind him, and for the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of relief, a small crack in the wall of tension that had consumed me. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but maybe it was the first step toward healing. Later that evening, Nathan came home, his face drawn with exhaustion, his shoulders slumped as he stepped into the living room. He paused when he saw me sitting on the couch, staring into the distance, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. He didn't ask about Ryan. He didn't need to. The unspoken words between us were enough. Instead, he sat down beside me, his presence warm and solid, a quiet comfort in the storm of my emotions. "I don't know what to say, Clara," he said quietly, his voice softer than it had been in days, his hand resting on the cushion between us, close but not touching. "You don't have to say anything," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper, my eyes meeting his with a quiet vulnerability. "We just need time." The words felt like a promise, a fragile thread of hope that we could find our way back to each other. Nathan reached for my hand then, his grip gentle but firm, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that felt like a lifeline. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page again, even though things were far from resolved. But maybe that was okay. Maybe we didn't need all the answers right now. Maybe we just needed to figure it out together, one step at a time. As the days went by, the tension slowly began to lift, like a fog dissipating in the morning sun. Nathan and I spent more time together, talking, reconnecting, learning how to move forward from the shock of Ryan's confession. We were still healing, still finding our way, but there was hope now, a small, fragile hope that we could overcome this. And maybe, just maybe, the truth had set us on a new path, one that would lead us to a deeper understanding of each other, of trust, and of what it truly meant to love.